Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're talking about Italian perfumery. I warned you that I was going to start picking on other countries because of the reception I got from my British perfumery video. I had a lot of fun making that video because I've always felt that British perfume stood apart from the general French style that pervades most of Europe, right? Likewise, I think Italian perfumery also, at least if not stands apart now, for a long time, until recent years at least, it did also try very hard to stand apart from what the French were doing. And by way of that, most of Europe, because let's be honest, the French perfume brands really dominate all of Western Europe and even parts of Eastern Europe where they're sold. So when you say French perfumer, you're really just saying perfume. It's not so distinct. But again, with the British perfume, they really have their own thing going on there with the styles, with the overall aesthetic of like austerity, and the perfumes being very reserved, sometimes understated in their performance and all that stuff. Very stately, nothing out of order. Now, Italian perfumery is not that. Okay, definitely not understated, definitely not reserved, but it is still different from most European perfume, including everything that's more or less based on the French style, because Italian perfume is very polemic. That's where it's different. So, again, English, UK perfume, reserved, understated, prim proper, sometimes austere. Italian perfume, it's polemic. And what I mean by that is it really, the men's fragrances are really trying to be ultra masculine, ultra macho, very, I guess, Awakens is brusque, surly, burly, that whole thing. Where on the other hand, the women's fragrances are very grand madame. They're all based on very traditional feminine tropes, whether we're talking old, like turn of the century through 1920s style chypre formulas or oriental formulas, heavy on powdery sandalwood elements, big aldehydes, tuberose and rose and jasmine and mossy bases, but just very much that big trumped up kind of grand madam sort of feminine style that was very popular in the early to mid 20th century into part of the 60s as well. So the Italian perfume brands, once they really began putting out perfumes, they really took that sort of, well, let's be honest, gender division and really pushed it like this. They wanted the men's fragrances to be unmistakably masculine and the women's fragrances to be unmistakably sophisticated and big and just, flowing dresses and jewelry and big makeup and that sort of thing, right? So, bold, very sure-footed, not understated, not quiet. Like, every Italian perfume brand was making perfume meant to be worn on a red carpet. That's the best way to look at it. They were making fragrances that were meant to be worn on a red carpet at the Met Gala, something like that, right? And that's really different from the general French diaspora because, yeah, there are a lot of big classic fragrances from French brands. Obviously, a lot of the ideas that the Italians exploited, they lifted or borrowed from the French, because they're kind of neighbors. Wasn't like with the UK where you've got the United Kingdom as an island over here and are kind of operating in a bit of a vacuum. They traded a lot with France too because the English Channel's right there and boats would go back and forth and then eventually they'd have the tunnel. But by and large, the Brits really tried to make something that was kind of unique to themselves. The powdery bases, the dry florals, right? The stately stuff, like I was saying. The stuff that harkens back to the 1700s and 1800s. Whereas the French were under constant modernization because they're developing a lot of the materials that the rest of the world would use anyway, right? All these firms coming out of France and also Germany and Switzerland, places like that. But the Italians were a bit more derivative in their styles. But again, the word I'm going to use here is polemic because they took what the French were doing with the Chypres and the Orientals and the Fougères and all that stuff and then just made them bigger. If that makes sense. They just made them bigger. So the mossy perfumes were mossier. The aldehyde perfumes were more aldehydes. Okay? Bigger. And just very staunchly gender coded, like I said. It's not like how some perfumes can kind of go in one way or the other. No. You smell a typical masculine cologne release from an Italian brand in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, and you're like, yep, that's a dude smell, right? Because it smells like a horse's saddle. It smells like a walk in the forest. It smells like freaking soil on the forest floor, like you rolled around in some loam or something, you know, or some compost. You know, it doesn't have a bit of prettiness in it at all. So masculine, it's almost ugly. So, almost ugly. So now, that really kind of changed into the 90s and 2000s, and this is mostly because a lot of the Italian houses were independent up until that point. They had some distributors like Euro Italia, Euro Cosmesi, stuff like that. They had what's the one that Basil Uomo used to use? Spa, I think. Serpia Spa. So, but then, as with all things that, you know, corporatize over time as the big fish eats the little fish. And a lot of these brands were getting bought up into distribution deals with Interparfums, with L'Oreal, you know, which at that time it was Cosmere. Then L'Oreal bought Cosmere, but you get my point. So the Italian brands really stopped being Italian when they stopped being independent. So it's kind of sad to say that in the 21st century, you know, in the 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s so far, most Italian brands don't feel Italian anymore. They lost that polemic, you know, his and hers, strength, you know, sexuality, you know, they lost that. They lost that virility and that strong sexual identity because they were corporatized and homogenized. And L'Oreal is now making Valentino. L'Oreal has been making Armani for a very long time. So Gucci is a Coty product. You see my point? You see my point, guys? So it's all French perfume now anyway. So there are independent Italian perfumers out there, like Il Profumo is making stuff that's really good. So I don't want to say that it's all gone, but the big designer brands are definitely 99% of them are now under some big French international corporate umbrella. Whereas the British perfume didn't do that. Florists stayed independent. All those little barbershop brands, all those little apothecary brands, D.R. Harris, G.O.F. Trumper, Truefit and Hill, Taylor of Old Bond Street, all those guys, with the exception of Penhaligon's. That's the only one that sold out. Penhaligon's sold out to Pouge, but Penhaligon's notwithstanding, all the other brands remained independent. And because they stayed independent, they were able to keep their uniquely British style intact. They didn't have to play the globalist game, homogenizing their perfumes to feel more like what Dior is selling, to feel more like what YSL is selling. You see my point? They didn't have to go that direction. Italian brands, unfortunately, these days, it's kind of hard. I mean, every once in a while, Dolce & Gabbana will throw a bone to their own heritage. Every once in a while. And Armani does too, periodically. It's not common, but it happens. Happens every now and then. You're more likely to find authentically Italian perfumes in the drugstore section. You stick with the old drugstore brands. That's where you're going to find the more authentically Italian stuff these days. Like I said, the big designers have all kind of cashed in their heritage to become part of the big umbrella and make all the money. But, now you know. One thing I will say that's kind of interesting, though, is that really all perfume, no matter where it's from, the UK, France, Germany, wherever, all perfume owes its existence to the Italians. All of it. I know, big words. You're like, how? How is that possible? Well, I have the answer right here. So there was a gentleman by the name of Giovanni Paolo Feminis, and he created something called Aqua Mirabilis. Aqua Mirabilis is not exactly a perfume, but it's a alcohol-heavy emulsion of alcohol and water, basically. So it's an alcohol and water solution. And this alcohol-based solution allowed perfumes to become more stable. Because like I was saying in other videos, perfumes, up until the creation of cologne, actually the very last video I made, I may have mentioned this. If I didn't, then I'm sorry. I'm mentioning it now if I didn't mention it then. But until the invention of eau de cologne, perfumes were typically oil. Because if you tried to drop the oil into water or anything else, it wouldn't mix. It would separate. So people would take the oils and they would wear the oils either behind their ears or whatever, or get a pomander. They would wear oil in a pomander. I have one of those right here, actually. If you're curious about that, what a pomander is. So, let me get this for you real fast. Okay, so here's a pomander. It's an ancient way of wearing perfume. If you didn't want to wear it on your skin, you would put the oil in a little piece of felt or something, or cotton or wool back in the day, and that would hold the scent. And then you would just wear it like a piece of jewelry. You'd wear the pomander, around your neck or whatever, and that's your smell. And when you didn't want it anymore, you'd either wash it or you'd throw it away and replace it with another wad of wool or something, or another piece of felt, because it wasn't hard to come by. And then you'd put more oil on that and you would wear that. Sometimes pomanders would have an individual piece of ambergris inside, or they would have musk pods inside from Siberian musk deer. They'd have other things that were aromatic in nature, pieces of incense inside of here. So it depends, but it's one way to wear perfume, oil perfume. Now, Aqua Mirabilis became the base for eau de cologne. And that is how you got the original Farina cologne, which, by the way, Johann Maria Farina was Italian. Yes, Johann Farina was Italian. So again, without the Italians, you wouldn't have any Western perfume as we know it today. Wasn't for Farina emigrating to Germany from Italy, you wouldn't have eau de cologne. And if it wasn't for Giovanni Paolo, what's his last name? Feminis? Yeah, if it wasn't for Giovanni Paolo Feminis, you wouldn't have the base to make cologne out of. Wouldn't exist. Aqua Mirabilis. So, in fact, they called Farina cologne Aqua Mirabilis for a time. And they also called 4711, which is made by a German guy who was copying the Italian guy. But yeah, so there you go. Now, on to some of my favorite Italian fragrances. Some of my most treasured Italian smells for the rest of this video. We'll just take it on from here on out. We'll talk about some of my favorite. Most of these are going to be vintages. Some of them discontinued. But they are distinctly Italian and they are loves of mine. So let's talk about them. So one of my favorite Italian fragrances is going to be this. And before you ask me, no, I don't have any Acqua di Parma. I know that feels like a sin for some people because Acqua di Parma is like one of the oldest Italian perfume brands, but it's a cologne and I've already got tons of cologne, so I've got plenty of 4711. It's like overpriced 4711. I don't really need that. I mean, I don't have Tom Ford Neroli Portofino either, so say blasphemy if you want, but one of my favorite Italian fragrances is this right here. Capucci Pour Homme, released by Roberto Capucci in 1967. So Capucci was one of the earliest Italian brands, designer brands, to release fragrances globally. Like not local stuff that you only bought in Italy. Like Roberto Capucci, designer, his perfumes were making their way to Tokyo, to Paris, to London, to New York and LA. So that was a big deal because Armani at that time wasn't really a thing. So, I mean, Gucci was a thing, but they weren't really making perfumes then. So Louis Vuitton is French, but people always think that that's an Italian brand for some reason, and it's not. So before you say, "Oh no, but what about Louis Vuitton?" No, he's French. It's not Italian. I know he looks Italian. It's got the way the logo is spelled, but it's not. It's not Italian. So there really just weren't a lot of Italian designers putting out fragrances on that large of a scale. And Roberto Capucci was one of the first. And what makes Roberto, man, I can't talk for some reason. What makes Roberto Capucci Pour Homme so good is it basically tries to be a most academic, sort of fundamental, stripped down, citrus aromatic chypre that it can be. It basically looked at what Monsieur de Givenchy was doing, right? Looked at what that was doing and said, we can do that, but stronger. And it achieved that by basically following a similar structure, but discarding the lavender and going more into leather notes. It's got pyrrolone or isobutylquinoline in here. It's got a very interesting kind of fruit note that also lends a kind of tart juiciness. And when it dries down, you get that oak moss, a very clear cut, sharp, very mossy dry down. And that's the beauty of a lot of Italian men's fragrances is the old Italian masculines, love it or hate it, but the old Italian masculines were very into pine, very into oak moss, very into herbs. So if you don't like herbs, you don't like pine, and for some reason you don't like oak moss, you kind of have no business at all. You have no business at all messing with Italian men's fragrances, at least not before 2000, okay? You're safe if you wear the newer stuff. Like I said, L'Oreal and Coty and all those guys have gobbled up all the brands. But pre-2000, you kind of have no business if you don't like that stuff because like the vast majority of Italian masculine fragrances, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, were built around mossy, piney, herbal, woody accords. It's just what they wore, man. Okay, it's what it was. It wasn't like you had much of anything else, any other options. So now, another one I really, really love. In fact, I actually like adore this to death. Is a little bit newer, of course, but it is this one right here. It is Gianfranco Fair for man. The old bottles would say man, man, like written in German, and uomo. So it didn't matter if you were German, Italian, French, or English speaker. You had a version of, you had a version of the name that was for your language. But the later bottles don't do that because the later bottles, they make this back part black. So it's actually black in the front too. The front and back are both black. So you don't get that window. These older bottles, you get this window like this. And yeah, this is another one that is just beautiful, beautiful cedarwood, herbs, again, sour, very sour bergamot, big oak moss riff, so, and some slightly animalic musks in the base, but this is not really an exercise in musk. This is more of a big, just woody fuck you. All right, this is a big old woody fuck you is what this is. And if you don't like that, again, no compromises, no fucks given. Doesn't care if it hurts your feelings. Okay. Doesn't care if you leave a bad review on Yelp. All right. Chest out, shoulders in, stomach in, sound off. You know, that's what you get. And that's the vibe here, guys. And not saying that that's the best vibe. I don't always like my perfumes to be that brunt. Sometimes I like more of a genteel, more of a discreet kind of masculinity. Obviously, I love things like Monsieur de Givenchy, which is kind of the epitome of that. But a big fat Sakatuum fragrance once in a while is cool, is fun. So, and the Italian brands are good for that. So obviously, I cannot mention Italian men's fragrances without mentioning the first Armani men's fragrance from 1984, I believe. I think it was 84. Could be 82. Pretty sure it was 84. Let me check real quick here. Just to be doubly sure. And it is yep, it's 84. So this stuff, the story goes that Giorgio Armani was actually a big fan of Monsieur de Givenchy, but he wanted his own version of it, right? Obviously. So he had this created. And it does follow a very similar formula. It has a bit of lavender in it. There's a tiny bit of a fougere accord, very small one, inside of it, but it is definitely a chypre fragrance. I wouldn't call this a fougere by any stretch of the imagination. but it does have a bit of that lavender geranium interplay in the heart of it. But mainly what you're going to get with this is you're going to get lemon, and you're going to get basil, and you're going to get sandalwood and oak moss. So that is the big difference between this and the Gianfranco Fair. Gianfranco Fair opted for cedarwood. It's a very dry, cedary fragrance, very dry, woody, cedary fragrance. This one is sandalwood, so it's a bit warmer, it's a bit more plush, a bit thicker. The oak moss provides that classic woody base, and then being that the heart has a bit of lavender in it, like I said, it's not as citric as the Gianfranco Fair. It's a bit rounder, a bit smoother, but the tarragon and the basil are really what set this apart. So you'll find a lot of men's fragrances from Italy, at least at that time period, were also playing around with basil. It was a very popular material for them. Another fragrance that goes very, very hard on the basil is going to be the first Versace men's fragrance, which I have around here someplace. Just got to get it. Got to get it, get it, get it. Got to get it, get it, get it. Where is it at? Where? Ah, here it is. I see it. Right here. So, for those of you guys who get on people about deep vintage, yes, this is a deep vintage bottle. It has the thin script, so you can kindly fuck off now. You can report back to your gatekeeper overlords that the devil passed the test. He has the quote-unquote real deal. All right? But I'm too tired to deal with that right now. However, this has another good, strong basil note, but it does go a little heavier on animalic musks. It's also a bit more, I want to say, a bit more towards petitgrain in this fragrance as well, whereas the other ones don't play with petitgrain too much. This one definitely does. So that petitgrain combined with the basil and a bit more of a spiciness to it. It's got more vanilla, so it's rounder, it's heavier. Gianni Versace was a bit more extra than Giorgio Armani. Okay, Giorgio Armani was a bit more suit and tie. Gianni Versace was chest out, V-cut neck, big chest hair, big medallion, kind of like an Italian version of the Bee Gees with the way he dressed. Minus the long feathered hair, though, didn't have any of that, but you get what I'm saying, right? He was definitely more of a gusto kind of guy. So he wasn't keeping it as dapper as Giorgio Armani was. His fragrance kind of reflects that a little bit. So now, speaking of drugstore fragrances, I said that Italian drugstore brands kind of keep the dream alive, whereas most designers have cashed in their chips and gone more global because of the being bought out. But this one right here, Basil Uomo, another 80s fragrance from 1987. And as the name suggests, you're going to get lots of basil. But this is much more of a green, sort of mossy, aromatic chypre. This plays with castoreum, so you've got to like castoreum. But it's got a sneaky bit of jasmine in the heart. And that sneaky bit of jasmine makes this feel a bit more floral than it might otherwise. A bit closer to something like Eau Sauvage. So just imagine Eau Sauvage with much more herbs, much greener. Okay, and with bigger, muskier leather notes that Eau Sauvage clearly doesn't have castoreum. So it's still very masculine, very manly, but it's clever in the way it kind of sneaks that little bit of jasmine in there. And obviously, again, big basil fragrance, so you have to be into basil. Another one that I really like It's a bit of a unicorn these days, so I can't really expect anyone in their right mind to go after a bottle. But one that's really good for me is this one. I've only got a small bottle of the stuff. And it's the original Gucci Pour Homme from 1976. Not the Gucci Pour Homme from the 2000s, and also not the Gucci Guilty Pour Homme or the Gucci, what's it? What was it called? Gucci by Gucci Pour Homme. There's been three different Gucci Pour Hommes. There's the Gucci by Gucci one from the late 2000s. There's the Tom Ford era one, which is also discontinued. Then there's the very, very original one. Now, some may go, but hey, wait a minute. Guy Robert made this fragrance, so how Italian can it be? And you're not wrong. A lot of these Italian fragrances were made by French perfumers, but they still have Italian oversight. And Guy Robert, from what I was told, worked off of a mod from Equipage, which is an earlier fragrance. So he took basically Equipage, which was itself a mod of Monsieur Rochas. So Monsieur Rochas begat Equipage, begat this fragrance. So iterative processes being what they are, I don't really care. Everyone iterates on everyone else, but this is another big bergamot, sandalwood, aromatic, herbal. So same kind of deal, but it's much earlier than the others because it's 76 and not the 80s. So you can kind of look at this as probably like the origin of the species for that particular style, but it's still very nice. A little too expensive for what it is nowadays. I wouldn't really go after it, like I said, but if money is no object to you and you want to get one, then I think it'll make you happy. Now let's talk about Crizia. Crizia. They do some weird stuff too. Crizia and Moschino are two Italian designers that really just like to make people's hair stand up on the back of their neck. They make fragrances that are very contrarian. And this one is no different. It is kind of like Crizia Uomo is kind of like you're taking Bogart one-man show and you're trying to make it more dapper, a little more well-behaved. So you get the same crazy animalics, the same big herbal notes, but it's just a little softer, a little quieter. So it's like you're taking and I've called a lot of fragrances this, but it's like you're trying to take a gorilla and stuff it into a tuxedo. Like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the doorman who was a big gorilla wearing a tuxedo, wouldn't let him into the club. It's like that. That's what this fragrance is. So, but it works well though. I like it. And then last but not least, lest we run too long, right? Don't want to run too long. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite leather fragrances of basically all time. A fragrance I love so much that I don't wear it all that much, and it's kind of my fault. But Moschino, or Moschino, I should say. It's probably pronounced Moschino. But 1990, Moschino Pour Homme. So this is a fragrance for lovers of spicy, leathery, aldehyde chypres. And there is a whole lot of mace in here. There's a whole lot of all kinds of big, heavy, spicy goodness. And the leather is musky, but this is kind of a brighter alternative to something like, say, Bellamy by Hermes. So if you found that to be too dark, then this is probably better for you. Whereas Bellamy is more like a horse riding outfit. Moschino Pour Homme is more like a guy riding a motorcycle. Best way to look at it. And yeah, it's carnation in this, mace, rosemary, lots of styrax in this. Again, with the animalic kind of tones in the base, but it's very spicy. And yeah, you can see I've put a chunk out of this one, so you know I love it. Most of my bottles don't have a big chunk taken out of them because I've got so many to choose from, but this one I've wailed on quite a bit, and I've got others. I have backups of this, so I'm safe. And that's really it, for now at least. Italian Perfumery. Love it, love it, love it. And honestly, it's one of those things where it's like people get angry at me for talking about it, even though I'm speaking the praises. They think I'm wrong, that I'm clueless, that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's fine. You can have that opinion. Just don't be rude, right? It's like I'm not punishing people for disagreeing with me. I'm punishing people for taking what I say personal when their name wasn't in my mouth. So, and if they think me talking about perfume that comes from their country is the same about talking shit about their mother, they should probably go to like get an eval and get that looked at, okay? Because I'm not declaring war on your country by talking about your perfume. It's not that serious. You know, we're not talking politics or religion here, or anything like that. We're talking smelly water and origins of smelly water and how smelly water smells a little different in one place than in another. Okay, that's all it is. And I love Italian perfumery. So before you get your pitchforks out and your torches, just remember, this is done out of love. Okay, this is not done with some superiority complex. I want to be on my little high horse, you know, and look down upon. So not doing that here. It's with reverence. So, okay, guys, this has been my video on Italian perfumery. Hopefully you enjoyed it. A lot of brands are left out, like Dolce & Gabbana, stuff like that. But again, I have my reasons for it. Disagree or pick your favorites in the comment section. Tell me about them. Catch you next time.